Silas, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. We're going to jump right in. We talked a little bit in the past about the occult. We talked about postmodernism. We talked about power structures, or the power structure, as it were. And it seems to me that where we are right now, that data as such is a key element in all this in the new power grid. Can you just give me your understanding of what we're talking about when we use a word like data and how that plays into power in the modern world and our relationship with it?
Data is pretty much the currency that facilitates everything we see within the modern world, the informational age. But even in the archaic period, it is that thing which moved society and civilization along, humanity as well, of course. Obviously, with the technological innovations, primarily in the area of telecommunications, that has sort of expedited this entire transformation of not just civilization, but of the species as well. So, in the new age, and as we're seeing with Harari discusses it within his works Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, where he describes himself as a dataist. Now, we'll probably get into dataism, and I'll find some quotes from Harari's work on what he believes are tenets of what he describes as the new theology. This is the next step forward for not just in terms of political science, but in terms of the entire social and civilizational apparatus, that we're going to go into not a communist or a capitalist society, but as he describes, a dataist society. So he has an extremely interesting quote, and it sort of speaks to this idea that data is far more valuable than gold. Hence why we see such a reliance, or not a reliance, more an extreme fanaticism surrounding the collection of data. For example, social media and the intelligence agencies and their influence on social media, and obviously their influence in creating social media. So Harari states, humans are merely tools for creating the Internet of all things. And we'll probably get into that as well. This Internet of all things, it ties in with this data and dataism, which may eventually spread out from planet Earth to pervade the whole galaxy and even the whole universe. This cosmic data processing system would be like God. It will be everywhere and will control everything, and humans are destined to merge into it. So it brings to the fore this idea that data is very synonymous, if we understand this force of God. It's very synonymous with consciousness, sentience, and it is the product of sentience, the product of consciousness. And by that product, shall they then control the means of production of said product, human beings, or sentience?
Well, I want to ask you kind of a question that is in my head as such. And I think, like, we're kind of at a position where we're just trying to delineate the basics of what we're looking at. So, as you say in Ireland, we're kind of like a bull looking into a field of thistles at the moment, where it's new, it's the shapes emerging through the mist. There's new archetypes that our brain doesn't yet recognize. We're trying to say what joins on to what. What are the mechanics of this? What are the long term? It's shaping. It's like we're trying to get our head around it right now. So I thought a key point you made there, right? Data will be kind of married on to consciousness and sentience, but there's like the question I want to ask is if the system, as it were, is reliant on data and human beings are producing data, then, as it were, is the system, to use the term, impotent in that it does not create, or barren, perhaps a better word, to use a female maybe kind of connotation, that the system itself is uncreative, yet is all powerful in another sense. Whereas it is dependent on the creation of data, which is largely created by human activity. So, in a sense, how does that relationship play out? Where a power structure or network, which has access to all data yet cannot create, has to come to terms with governing and being dependent on human endeavor, human inspiration, um, human creativity. So is it sort of riding still on the coattails of human creativity all the time? And how can we understand how that relationship is going to play out, if you know where I'm coming from?
Oh no, absolutely. It's a fantastic question. This sort of ties in with the archaic concept or mythology that's existent within Sumer. I'll probably get into later on in our discussion, but within the Garden of Paradise, it's the same sort of idea where you had the Anunnaki, or they also go by the Ijiji gods, in which he overthrew the primordial creator deity and then's created. I'm sort of boiling it down to its simplistic principles or tenets. The story goes they overthrew the primordial creator deity, Tiamat, then they created the Garden of Paradise. In this garden, because they were obviously lazy, gluttonous, and what have you, they created human beings as slaves. Now, eventually, human beings, because they had the knowledge to labour and do all the technical things that the Anunnaki were largely lazy and complacent. This is seen within the Anunnaki, or Ijiji gods, which in some cases are synonymous within the Sumerian account, but later on within the Akkadian and Babylonian accounts. The Anunnaki and Ijiji gods seem to be distinct beings. However, generally in the Sumerian mythos, the Anunnaki overthrew primordial deities. They were the seventh generation, the rebellious generation, sons of disobedience, overthrew the primordial creator deity of both Apsu and Tiamat. Eventually, Marduk slays Tiamat and fashions the world out of Tiamat's corpse. Tiamat or Tehom literally means the deep. Tehom, this is seen within Genesis 1:6, and God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." What this means is the Apsu would be considered, in the elemental sense, the fresh waters, the inland waters, and Tiamat, the primordial chaos, the waters out from the inland and the coasts, the salt water. Another way to view this is the waters of the deep, or the waters of earth, and the cosmic sea, as the Sumerians or Babylonians would have seen it, the night sky, space. Those were seen as a sort of sea and ocean, a cosmic ocean, if you will. So again, this is what this means. The separation of the vault of the sky, the waters of the sky, firmament, as some Christians call it, and also the waters of earth. So the separation of earth and sky. It goes on to state in Genesis 1:7, so God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. Continues on. Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. Tiamat is seen as primordial chaos. However, the son of Apsu and Tiamat, the primordial creator deities that were slain by these Anunnaki, these sons of disobedience, will mainly stick to the Sumerian myth because they begin to develop within the Babylonian and later Akkadian myths. But we see that Marduk, or Mar-Utu, the calf, sun or solar calf, again Amarutu, the Sumerian word for it, would later develop into our term for the Babylonians, the Amorites, of whom were Semitic peoples. Eventually, Marduk would slay the son of Apsu and Tiamat, Kingu, and mix his blood with the earth and create a clay, if you will. And from that created the first human beings. Adapa was the Sumerian word for it, which obviously links to Adama, or Adam, which is etymologically similar, which shares the same etymological root as Edom, which is red. Adama itself, due to the sort of parent word within that, dam, which in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, means blood. So literally, Adam is of the blood. This is where the meaning for Adama, son of the red earth, derives from, within a contextual sense, from ancient Hebrew, and that term Ha-Adamah, which is found within Genesis. So as we see, there's a great many parallels here. The Babylonians themselves, the Amorites, were absolutely Semitic peoples that invaded from the north, conquered Sumeria, created the first empire, an empire being, in its literalist sense, two or more cultures encapsulated within a superstate. So during the Aki-2 festival, the New Year in essence, in Babylon, we find that it coincided with the sowing of the barley. However, within both the Sumerian and Babylonian New Year, Aki-2, we find that Marduk, it was a festival centered around Marduk, and in essence, it reiterated this idea of the kingship of Marduk over all of the gods, and the kingship and priesthood of the few, and their right to rule over the many, that humans were meant to feed the gods with sacrifice, with the sacrifice of their time to produce for the gods. And from this, the gods would offer their protection via their intercessors, the priest kings or the priest class. And without this, the slave class, if you will, of humans who were created within the Garden of Paradise, because the gods themselves provided the conditions of life. Thus, digressing, like the Anunnaki, the seventh generation of the gods, created by Tiamat and Apsu to look after creation, like they rebelled against their primordial creators, so shall we see something probably similar occur within this generation of the Sons of Disobedience, the Hararis, the World Economic Forum, the Klaus Schwabs of the world. This idea of the Internet of Things, of recreating the entire parameters of not just life and the species, but of the world of form and of the receptacle of perception, which views and thus influences that world of form. You're absolutely correct. It is a sort of parasitical relationship that's there. However, we see a potential solution to this problem that you're stating within cybernetics. And they talk about, in essence, psychological homeostasis. Now, I'll probably post some once I edit this as a video, but if you see a homeostatic system, you will have a receptor which receives the information from the target system. In this case, it would be the human. It would have a control center which would process that data. That would be the sort of control center of the Internet of Things. It might be a nodal server or what have you. Then you would have an effector. So the control center would send an output to the effector. The effector would then translate that output, that informational output from the control center, and it would target the psychology of the target, the human, if you will, in this case. It would then even out the imbalance, be it a psychological imbalance or what have you. So I hope I'm making sense in that regard. When Harari discusses the Internet of Things, he's literally discussing this idea that the cyberneticists were talking about in the 50s, that they will create a system of homeostasis, that individuals will be creative, but they will be creative within parameters set by the system or the controllers of the Internet of Things.
Right. There's a key kind of thing there. Like, it's kind of like, if you take a musical metaphor, if we look at, say, Jimi Hendrix or Miles Davis, and there were these certain innovators that came along at certain points in the history of music that just wiped everything else, like off they wiped the floor with everything else because they were absolutely innovative. So what you're kind of suggesting is that in this homeostasis system, where there's a control center that's taking in, say, human creative innovation, it's able to somehow compute it, output it into what you said was an output effector, and sort of repackage it and then send it back to the target. So it's like it normalizes human creativity, which we might assert is an aspect of the divine, to use that type of terminology, i.e. it is the spark of essence of creativity. So what you were kind of suggesting there in this homeostasis system is that this can be regulated and normalized within the system. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes. To sort of develop that music analogy even further, if you look at digital sound recording, you will typically find in the sort of raw edit, or say if we're recording a song or whatever, the raw edit will be, you will have the dynamic ranges throughout the entire song. That then gets quantized, which is a sort of fancy term for parameters get set on the sort of decibel range, the volume, and it sort of
It flattens the curve, right?
flattens the curve. Absolutely. Fantastic, yes. And it sort of sterilizes the dynamic ranges. Again, that has benefits and also has quite a great deal of downside, I would argue. But that is similar to what's occurring here. That indeed it will take that creativity, sort of dull it in a way.
Okay, so let me to flesh out the question a little bit further. If it can take it and dull it and quantize it, to use the kind of musical metaphor, sound recording metaphor, given that the creative impulse is theoretically infinite, is the final relationship between the system and human beings, the creative human um, instinct, is it ultimately symbiotic? Because the system can ultimately never get a foothold in the permanent sense, because the creative instinct is always going to jump to the left or the right, or come up with something new. We're always going to have a new Jimi Hendrix or a new Miles Davis or a new John Coltrane or a new whomever. You know what I mean? That you can't stop that. It can never stop it. It can only react to it. So, but does that mean then that we ultimately end up with a kind of a symbiotic relationship where two wheels are spinning, that it can never conquer really truly in the true sense, that it must always react as such?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Plethora of cautionary tales on this sort of Luciferian ideal. I mean, Manly P. Hall discussed it. Obviously, Harari's discussing it without actually stating it outright. But yes, it's Luciferian, where they wish to, again, as Harari states, create a data processing system that would be like God, or would be equal to God. This force and God, and obviously the Holy Spirit or Ruach Hakodesh, whatever term we want to use, that is your stating. It is infinite potential, and to really, again, to quantize infinite potential is a futile task. Obviously, they're going to do it because, as you're stating, it's a sort of symbiosis that, to be simplistic about it, good and evil must exist to create the motion of life, like life and death and everything else. Again, it's all symbiotic, and like them, this source of evil that we see, or whatever term we wish to use, it has to exist, and nature potentially is working vicariously through it to as an instrument of not just fate, but an instrument of nature herself. Nature herself is resetting. It seems to work cyclically, obviously.
So that's a fascinating point. Like what you're suggesting there, if we're to use the aforementioned frontman, if that's indeed what Mr. Noah Harari is, but that Noah and co, Uncle Noah, are actually the useful idiots of Mother Nature. That's kind of what you're saying there, is it not?
Yes, that's what I think the bigger picture is. But I think these people are so, see, when you're born into that luxury, and obviously I'm not, so I'm sort of empathizing with their situation. But when you're born into that luxury, when you have everything basically on a silver platter, so to say, you begin to believe yourself to be a god, that you're above everyone else. You've never had to toil, to work, to labor. You've never been subordinate to anyone else's will. So therefore, you do believe that your will is omnipotent, and it is superior to every other individual. So therefore, you take the path of least resistance, like everything else in nature. And the path of least resistance is for them to, well, go down this path. Nature herself, because the system is perfect, it's cyclical, it has mutually compatible yet paradoxical forces working within it to create constant eternal motion, that it just merely sort of uses them as an instrument to do a sort of cyclical reset, an end.
Well, it seems to me there's a couple of key Achilles heels in the system. Number one, it has no natural predator apparent. So, in the absence of any natural competition, it seems that it's doomed to a kind of Caligula fate, that it's just going to become fat and lazy, and it's going to lose its, how can, like, it's trying to exist without competition, if you will, which is a completely unnatural state, because who can compete against it if it's sort of omnipotent in the temporary kind of sense. So there's no competition. So it seems that it's going to become ultimately fat and lazy and drunk, guzzling bottles of wine and bunches of grapes, and having orgies, etc. That they're literally going to be living the dream, as it were. So, but I mean that the roots of their own downfall seem to be sown in that. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even the algorithm as well. The algorithm that you would have to impose to create this Internet of Things, if you will, and again, as I've stated, create a system of autopoiesis or biological and psychological homeostasis, probably based on psychotronic frequency based warfare. For that algorithm to work correctly ad infinitum, perpetually into the future, it has to constantly have, again, as you're saying, resistance. It has to have competition for it then to calibrate correctly. And then from that proper calibration, it then regulates the system ever more tightly, ever more perfectly. If it does not have that, it's not just the controllers themselves that grow fat and lazy and inept. It's the algorithm itself.
Well, there was a key point in the kind of working man's understanding of systems, and it was to do with the bell curve, which was a basic graph for any organization or system. And the idea was that there was always that which existed outside of the bell curve, and that was a necessary aspect of the identity or structure of any system, group, society, etc. So you're making a very interesting point there, which I think a lot of people have asked the question, well, what happens to me? What happens to those of us who dissent? What happens to those of us who are not, we don't want to acknowledge this type of system. We feel it's against our humanity. We don't like the scent of it. It doesn't resonate with us. We don't want to follow along. And the question is, well, what happens to us? Are we going to be herded onto the train or find ourselves in the gulag, etc., etc.? But from what you were saying there, Silas, it seems reasonable to infer that whoever may have designed such a system would have factored in the necessity for that which is outside the bell curve, and actually our existence as dissent may actually be informing the algorithm and or the structure in a way we mightn't have initially anticipated, and we might be necessary is to keep barking at their heels to keep them on their toes. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is that fair summation?
Certainly, our descent, I mean, even what we're doing now, factors into the algorithm. However, of course, in their system, I don't know if descent will continue in their sort of closed loop system. If we will continue to sort of bark at their heels, because again these individuals as well have quite a problem with ego, the human aspect to this Internet of all things. The controllers, they have quite an issue with ego, and of course all of this is born out of ego. You can see it entirely.
But from a systems point of view, they will possibly see dissent as a necessity to keep the system calibrated, as you say.
Certainly, you would have to have that. You have to have some form of competition. But the problem is to maintain a high level of dissent. And what I mean by a high level, I don't mean in quantity. I mean dissent that sort of springs up naturally. It isn't squashed, or it isn't in any way censored or curtailed or anything like that. True competition. Really, that's what would provide the best calibration for this said algorithm of the Internet of Things. I really do think they wouldn't allow that sort of natural descent. They would, as we're seeing, they censor it. They censor descent at every turn. They again quantize descent in a weird sort of way.
Well, that's the interesting point there. So it's kind of like you now want to manufacture the descent and control the descent and lead. It was the old school thing, isn't it? You're back to square one. You're leading the descent. So where the system gets the scent or the taste of grassroots descent, it will literally co-opt it, quantize it, and lead it and utilize it to calibrate the system in a softly type way.
Oh, definitely, yes, yes. It's all about creating predictability. So the problem is, from the fallible mind of man can never come something that's, as Harari, desires, something that's like God. It's just impossible. I mean, as we're talking about God, this force, you can think of it in a agnostic or atheistical sense as well. That this sort of force of all potentiality that cannot be reached by man or by even a committee of men. Each human being, each sentient being on planet Earth, everything on planet Earth really, is but a fractal of that potentiality. But even everything on Earth is not the whole of that potentiality. It is merely a very small percentage. Thus, for them to attempt to create a system that's like that, I mean, obviously it's futile. However long it goes on for, we can speculate, but it will it will end in disaster. I foresee anyway.
But is it possible that they'll attempt to create a world within the world as such, a wheel within a wheel? That their system, that they will become godlike in, in a kind of subjective sense, that they will become gods within that system, the wheel within the wheel. That they'll farm human beings. They'll create a system where we'll be bred in captivity eventually. By generational, as the data system grows, as it gets more information, it gets exponentially stronger all the time. It becomes like a whirlpool that's gradually bringing everything in around it, and the more it knows, sort of thing. And at the same time, you have the development of technology is expanding at an exponential rate at the same historical along the same historical timeline. So you're left with this event horizon type situation where you're heading into a black hole. You literally are sort of creating a new reality in the physical sense, but also in like a consciousness sense. So that as generational, you have generations growing up who will, like for us, perhaps right now, this all seems like some sort of dystopian nightmare. But perhaps in a generation or two, it's gradually, slowly, little bits of it start to become normalized. And it's a drip, drip, drip kind of thing where you're gradually acquiescing to this. And, over a certain timeline, mankind forgets his roots, perhaps, and slowly wakes up one day in the new dawn, the grey new dawn in the system, and has kind of forgotten who he was and perhaps compartmentalized a part of himself that used to be alive, but doesn't have the wherewithal to even know what that inner instinct, what that flame used to be, if you will, if you know what I mean. That it's some distant memory, long forgotten, and that, people will find themselves divorced from their nature, yet nature still alive within them, so that they'll have this inner instinct that they won't be able to reconcile. So I wanted to kind of ask you what this society in the future that we may be heading towards, the people that will be in that society, what will be their sensibility or their sense of who they are? Will they be very unhappy? Will they be depressed? Will they be at odds with themselves? Or will they love the system? Or how do you see this gradual common sense of the masses? What will it look like in the future, do you think?
Well, to sort of steal a term from Mikhail Foucault, we see that it is that would be a heterotopia. And you're absolutely correct. That's sort of what they're going for. A sort of nightmarish or alien world within a world. But yeah, we can already see now again, as Harari states this, and of course, what I'm stating here sounds like science fiction, but he seems to state it as fact, and obviously he's lauded as an intellectual, world class intellectual by the World Economic Forum and the richest people on planet Earth and the most powerful. So he has to be taken seriously in what he states. He's certainly taken seriously by these individuals, but you can already sort of see what's current within, as you're stating, we can't reconcile with that natural instinct within us, that we feel we are on the wrong trajectory. That, for example, in the modern sense, we see mental health problems have skyrocketed. And obviously, it's not just mental health problems, it's also forms of escapism that we see, self-destructive forms of escapism, alcoholism, drug abuse, I mean, even sort of self-harming or what have you. So we see that prevalent within the culture, and it sort of just sprang up as mass urbanization and postmodernism, and this sort of strange mismatch of culture, as came knocking at the doorstep, and it really is a consequence of that. However, we see Harari discussing this idea of biodigitalism, transhumanism, and all this. So it makes one wonder in the future, because obviously they see this right now, what their system that they desire is actually doing to people, what it will do to people, because we're seeing right now that they're actually having to artificially collapse the system, reset the system, to create a state of helplessness within the populace, to thus get the populace to go along with something that they damn well know the populace believe is antithetical to their interests, is entirely alien to them. Because, as you're saying, they still have that flame of nature inside of them, of God, of the actual intent, the purpose of this world. If we go into a state of transhumanism, meaning they start to biodigital implantations, control functions, this system of homeostasis or autopoiesis, what have you. I mean, at that point, they could theoretically, we'll take them at their word, they could theoretically control the psychology and the impulses and the biological and neurological impulses of individuals directly. So at that point, people would, in essence, as husks, sleepwalk into this system. So yeah, we obviously don't want to get to that stage. It has to be sort of reversed before we get to that stage. Hopefully, it will be naturally.
Well, very, very quickly, we've used that term in the past, husk. I mean, the husk comes up. Steiner refers to Freemasonry being a husk of what it was, i.e., it's lost its content, and we referred to the husks, as it were, in parts of the Kabbalah. Am I correct in saying that, Silas?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So, a term that came up just during the week actually was a kernel, and a kernel is a terminology for a key sort of mother operating system, or a supercomputer central chip that runs literally everything. Everything is wired in through it. But the terminology, you can look it up, is kernel. So it seemed to me interesting from a language point of view that once you remove the old seed, you have the husk, and once you now have the empty husk, you can instate the new kernel in the husk, and you grow your new world. But I just thought it was an interesting use of language that they're using the seed sort of harvest, sort of farming, agricultural language, which is central to fertility and growing in nature. It's like they're trying to usurp that language and repackage that language.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that goes back to Sumer and all of these mystery religions. We see the prevalence of 322. I won't go into the entirety of the significance of that number, but March 22nd, the spring equinox, that is the start of the Babylonian and Sumerian calendar. Again, it was the harvesting of the barley, was primarily a festival dedicated to the deity of Marduk, which, if you trace him back, this deity sort of transforms into Baal and Yahweh and Baal Hamon in Carthage as well. So yes, extremely important in the occult sense. But yes, this idea of the harvest as well. You have the Georgia Guidestones. Georgia comes from a Greek word meaning agriculture, or in an archaic sense, harvest. And we have as well John Dee in 1581, obviously, the angelic conversations that him and Kelly had. You see the angel discuss with them that they were to take up God's flail and separate the wheat from the chaff, as you're saying, the kernel, create the husk. Absolutely, yeah. It's all interconnected.
And as this future society potentially, if or foreseeably, if the system, to my mind, I believe it will have a heyday. I believe it will have a kind of a Reich, if you will. It'll have its vision fulfilled, but for a temporal period, for a period of time. But I believe, like, as we kind of hinted at earlier on, the vicarious workings of nature, we hope, are at play, in that we kind of sense that nature itself may have birthed the demon, as it were, as a kind of a cancerous cell designed to eventually cause the amputation of the rotten parts and the rest of the system. So like I foresee, like, if people, first of all, the system, if it came into place, if it does come into place, will be unipolar as I see it, and will be unassailable. It will have no natural predators. So the seeds of its own demise, pardon the pun, are kind of sown into the rot of the luxury of omnipotence. And meanwhile, underneath the power structure, the society that will exist under it will be largely sort of have a carcinogenic soul, or will be laden with a kind of suicidal impulse, that it would be like a self-hating, because there will be always some distant memory of freedom and of nature, and it will always have, even those who acquiesce completely to the system will have this weird sense deep down that they won't even understand, but it'll be nature knocking deep down their soul saying this is wrong, but they may internalize it in some new way to as a self-hate. They may actually look at it within themselves and say, that's part of me that's wrong, or that's a part of me that's a weakness. And it may be completely repackaged, because I think that there's going to be a strong sense, right now even there is a strong sense of subjectivity in consciousness. And I think this ties in a little bit with like the chaos magic concept of things are as you see they are. And literally we're knocking into the realms of the creation of reality. And we may be, like, as Steiner hinted about this with some of the possible secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, or some of the possible secrets within Masonry, etc., where the capacity for thought to affect matter. Now, I know that sounds very far out, but he kind of rationalized it as thought being an electric impulse, essentially, in the brain, and that matter itself, electrons, atoms, essentially had an electric impulse or character or nature about them. Now, where you go from there to actually being able to affect matter by thought is, I don't know, but he was joining it up in his lectures at the time. Now, I just want to quickly say, I am no fan of Mr. Steiner, or of Freemasonry, or of any of that world, but I take note of what he said, But the reason I'm saying it, Silas, is I think we're going into a world where it's no longer it is what it is. It is what you think it is, or rather what you've been shown it is, or your perception has been managed and conditioned to allow you to think it is. So it's going to be very, very difficult to literally discern truth in any objective sense. I think we've seen that a lot with media, in the simpler terms, with news, with historical events happening around us, etc., but also with a lot of identity kind of stuff, like who we think we are as a nation, as a country, as a religion, as a people, what our tribal backgrounds are. what it's okay for us to be, what it's not okay for us to be, down to our values, what we think is morally right, what we think is morally wrong. Literally every core parts of our decision making and identity have been completely altered. And like, whereas now, in perhaps the generation we're in, we've moved from like seismic change. A lot of us have literally seen the technological age come in, and we've seen seismic change. We're talking tonight to try and make sense of it. But in a generation or two down the line, those, like our sons and daughters, our grandkids, great grandkids, will have completely normalized stuff that we today think is really strange or odd, or we're trying to get our head around it or whatever. They will have completely normalized it. So in their thinking, their consciousness, their literally their ability to think about what is the world around me, who am I, how do I relate to others outside me, be they my family, my community, and my country, that will all have radically altered and become normalized. So the underlying point is that perception in this realm is sort of fluid, and as we think, it's literally starting to sort of create the world around us in a kind of almost chaos magic type manner. And I think that's the key thing that will be tied in with the data giant, the data monolith. Because as we said earlier on, and I asked you the question, the human instinct, the creativity will have feed into the system. It'll process it, normalize it, and spit it back out into the group in a kind of quantized manner, and it'll have normalized it. So it's like, it seems like there's this strange vortex spiral relationship between subject and system that eventually, it's like, I keep thinking, when you pull the plug out of the bathtub when you were a kid and the bat was full of water, and you got the plug in your hand but the water's not moving yet, and you're going, in the back of your head, you're going, all that water is not going to fit down that little hole. It just won't. I can't, and you're looking at it and you slowly see the spiral arrive, and next thing the water's spinning around, and there's some part of your head as a kid in that bathtub is your inner scientist and is studying some primordial aspects of nature at work. Like in the front of your head, you're just looking at the water going down the hole, right? But in the back of your head, you're actually taking it in, what's going on, And I think that's how this system, where it's headed. It's headed into, now it's an unknown, for my money anyway. It's an unknown destination on the long term. I don't know. But one question I wanted to ask you: if this system is a centralized system that is dependent on data, networks, and the availability to retrieve, process data, there seems to me to be a couple of Achilles heels, right? Number one, and probably in my view anyway, most importantly, it's centralized. Now, like any power structure that's completely centralized is one system. It seems to me that it's open to being hacked, attacked, duplicated, mutated, usurped, and like the
leadership
I beg
as
your pardon?
well. The leadership as well, a strong potential of eating themselves in a sort of Ouroboros style manner.
Like, if you had Society A, and I didn't like how you were running the show, right? I don't like Silas's society at all, but he's got a great system. He's got a great structure. Like, couldn't I steal your structure and set up Zeilberg's society the way he sees it? Now, I've used the same tools as the trade.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you get me? So what I'm wondering is, down the line, is it possible we could see like the new civil wars in the future will not be around geographical territory like we had in the past? War was about ground. That it may be to do with this type of consciousness data sphere space. Do you think so?
And what you stated in terms of perception, there's actually an experiment that proves that our perception affects the world of form around us. The double slit experiment. I'll touch on that in a little bit, but absolutely it'll be a sort of war between data stream algorithms, the supremacy of certain algorithms comparative to other algorithms and what have you. It will be cyber polygon. It'll be sort of cyber wars and what have you. And that will affect the real world.
What is Cyber Polygon? That sounds amazing. What is that?
It's a sort of war game scenario put forth by the World Economic Forum, in which it was an exercise that dealt with an intentional and organized attack upon in essence, the cyber infrastructure of the major financial institutions of the world. That was in June 2021. Obviously, this is all just a wargaming scenario in terms of preparedness and how these financial institutions would react to such a monumental attack upon their infrastructure. But obviously, that's a potential crisis narrative that could come down the line as well. But that is what one could say a sort of a primer for what's to come in the future. As you're saying, it will be a fight between these chaos magicians, these lords of perception, that they will fight for control of the husks and fight in a manner unlike what we see in conventional a conventional warfare sense. It will be fought in a totally alien and foreign way, again along algorithmic lines.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, right? If the power structure as is centralized, say as I believe it is after 1945, there were no longer any nations. There were no longer countries that were self-determined. That at that point, power was centralized in the world. We had a global empire. We had the death of not just nations, but of empires and superpowers, and we had a centralized system essentially. If that's true, as I think it is, if it's true, right, then how could you have a kind of a cyber polygon type warfare that would develop around super manifestations of algorithms when the algorithm space where the warfare takes place is kind of hyper real? Whereas normative warfare, if I go to war with you, I need an army, I need land, I need a navy, I need finance to be able to keep all that going. I want to take over, like, I need tangible, real things that I'll own to be able to launch an attack to steal tangible, real things that you own. Now, the problem I'm trying to get my head around is if one source owns everything, then where is the space for conflict other than hypothetically in the algorithmic sphere? I don't know. Do you get the question? I know it's a bit of a long one. So can you give me what's your thoughts on that?
In terms of once you enter into the Internet of Things, of course, Cyber Polygon was theorized to be but a collection of hackers and hacker groups. So obviously, that's a very unconventional form of this advanced warfare that we're talking about. Once you enter into the Internet of Things, again, the sort of lords of perception and their control of the planet, if you will, as you're stating, it is monolithic, it is unipolar. However, in a similar fashion, a sort of hacker, to use contemporary terminology, could write a better algorithm.
Right. Now this is fascinating to me because this is back to a key question I asked you earlier on, right? Remember I said Miles Davis and Jimi Hendrix. Someone comes along and wipes the floor with the whole thing. Now imagine Miles Davis meets Jimi Hendrix, except it's not a guitar or a trumpet he's got in front of him. It's a computer. And this dude is a modern day magi, shaman. You know, let's create an archetype here for a Twilight Zone episode. This dude lives in his mom's basement. He has no friends. He has no girlfriends. He can recite the telephone book to you backwards. He's a polymath, right? He was deciphering ancient Greek manuscripts when he was 4 years old. His parents were deadbeats or whatever. He's a freak of nature. It's an archetypal character, right? I'm just randomly creating him in my head. But he's in his basement. And he creates this thing. This, what do you call it? Polygon, right? What did you call it?
Yeah, like a cyber polygon, like attack.
Cyber polygon.
Yeah.
So it seems to me now that this this is a real factor somewhere. Now, how is this guy powerful, or might he be powerful? Well, it seems right that if the whole system is a kind of a postmodernist arena where chaos magic exists, where what you think becomes real, and true meaning has been done away with long ago, then it seems like the power structure itself might become victim of that. So who owns what? Where's the money? It's all up for grabs. Everything can be subcontracted. Nothing really is linear anymore. So the guy in the basement and his likes could foreseeably, you know, Bitcoin themselves or algorithmize themselves into a sphere of power, potentially.
With the Internet of Things, as you stated, the centralization is what makes it brittle and inflexible. But with the block, they theorize they will use obviously a centralized blockchain technology. Now, this gets around some of the issues with centralization and its brittleness. But any cryptographical algorithm has holes within it that can be exploited. And I'm not just talking about in terms of a blockchain like technology. I'm not just talking about the sort of direct hits where you can control the system via reaching the 51% hash rate threshold. Anyone that knows anything about blockchain will understand that. I'm actually talking about code itself, finding loopholes within that, finding loopholes within the parameter of the code. Now, obviously, I'm not an expert on this, but everything has loopholes. Everything, even what's theorized to be, sealed tight systems such as blockchain. So the problem is, once you bring this into the Internet of Things, and Harari just doesn't want sentient life connected to the Internet of Things. He wants all life, including trees. So trees, everything within the natural world. And he states once we go out into space, the galaxy, what have you, if one believes in believes in that, or if not. But he states that we should colonize all of that too with the Internet of Things. That we should control everything. Everything should be connected to the grid. Now, the problem is with that, if you connect everything to the grid, everything becomes thence a husk and is controlled. Its biological impulses are controlled. Its data is surveyed and collected and processed. Every small facet of the target population and individual themselves is controlled and collated. The problem is, once that gets hacked, it's not just your bank account that goes to zero or what have you. It's you go to zero or you become controlled. Do you see what I'm saying? It's very. I mean, it really is open to brittleness. It's inflexible to such an attack, and such an attack as well would be largely difficult to find within the population. I could imagine if it was a good hacker as well. We even see at the top. I mean, there would be wars against the sort of elite would fight wars with each other based on algorithm. Who has the better algorithm? Who can control the individual more precisely? They would fight for power over the husks below. It doesn't bear thinking about, honestly. But yeah, it's the system.
Well, it's like the guy in the back to the guy in the basement. Like he doesn't need to know now how to conjure the genie. He just needs the lamp. The genie's already there, right? So it's like you've got all the advanced psychological stuff. You've got the Hadoop, the big data gathering. You've got the central. I wanted a quick footnote here. What was the name of the guy in Britain in the 1960s who developed that concept for the central management of corporations from a single computer room? He was one of the first transhumanists.
Are you talking about Stafford Beer?
That's the man. Stafford, isn't it?
Yeah. Stafford Beer,
What's the surname? Can you spell that?
Beer, like the drink. Fantastic name.
Stafford Beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Beer. So, like, if like the point I'm trying to make is, if you have the system, it runs, and you're possibly you can control human beings, essentially human behavior, through the system. Then the system can be hacked. So then, any character potentially who can get in there or rewrite aspects of it in a more sophisticated manner, or a more strategic manner. Anyone who can get the Trojan horse into the system can theoretically have their own control of it. Like, so it seems to me that this is the battleground of the future.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the conventional armies themselves would be controlled by this system.
Totally, yeah.
If Harari's description of the Internet of Things is obviously correct, or will be possible.
Well, it seems to be so sophisticated. Like, as Harari, I've briefly kind of gone through some of his content lately, has stated that wars are a thing of the past. War doesn't happen anymore. Not in any normative sense. Not in the normative sense of Germany invading Russia, or Germany invading France, or England invading Germany, etc., etc. It just doesn't happen anymore. And like, it seems to me to be that's an inevitable outcome of the unipolar world. So there's like there are no natural predators. The world has been normalized. Like, the groundwork has been done for the maneuver of this system into place. So you now have the normalized world. So it's ready to be rolled out, as it were. Which brings me to a question I wanted to ask you. And this might sound paranoid, right? Ha ha ha. But what is your thinking around this concept that technology as such is much older than what we're led to believe? Or to ask the question a slightly different way, that technology now is at point X in 2022, but arguably technology may have been at point X in 1822, but they didn't tell us. What's your thinking on that kind of stuff?
Prior resets and such. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. As well, we even understand from official history, when they switched to, I think it was the Gregorian calendar, there was a sort of issue. I think it was about 8 years or so we lost, if I recall correctly. It was about 8 years or so we lost. So obviously the timing as well and the dates may be incorrect, and is how they're purported to us. In terms of prior resets, we already see it within the mythology. And I don't take mythology as fiction. I see mythology not as, pure direct fact, but it is fact interwoven within a sort of raconteur fable, if you will. And I find a great deal of truth within it. So we see Atlantis and such is discussed there. We even see the Tower of Babel. Others, there's a plethora of them, and they're cross-cultural. So therefore, it must be speaking of a truth that's again hidden in allegory or metaphor or mythology. So absolutely, there's been prior resets. Think of life as that. This term, "there's nothing new under the sun." I sort of covered it in my first book. I showed that the cycles of outburst and then hitting its zenith, the civilization that is, and then decline, they seem to rhyme. They aren't exactly the same, but they rhyme. And it's much like the sine wave, the oscillations of history, that we hit a certain upper limit. And you even see it in the market, that everything seems to, even swing ups and swing downs, they will always, unless they're artificially rigged, of course, by algorithms, they tend to hit parameters of, psychological levels, if you will, and they won't go any further. It's very similar to the double slit experiment. So we were just discussing how perception affects the world of form. So in the double slit experiment, I'll just read it. It's a section within my book. We see that if photons are parsed through a double slit screen onto a background, then without a visual detector, they seemingly display a wave-like interference pattern. And if they are parsed through individually, then each photon will arrange themselves mathematically into this pattern, like each is a fractal of a larger mathematical whole, and this explains the cyclical patterns seen within the human species and of our social constructs too. If a visual detector is placed in front of the screen, then peculiarly, the interference pattern or photon dispersal seems to display two lines, in line with the double slit. So this actually goes to sort of simulation theory. It also discusses consciousness as the sort of prima materia of the universe, again, perception or awareness. But it's much like, I don't know if you're you've played many video games within your life, but if you look at 3D renders of buildings,
I think I'm playing one right now. Go ahead.
if you look at 3D renders of buildings within a video game at a distance, to save on graphical memory, the game will render the building merely as the geometric shape with minimal detail, obviously to save on graphical processing and graphical memory. The closer you then get to it, it seems to show more and more and more detail. It's what we call popping within video games. So it's a similar sort of thing that was found within this double slit experiment. And as I was stating as well, we act symbiotically with this. It's sort of the, whatever happens in the microcosm occurs in the macrocosm. Our psychology is mathematically linked to this pattern of the universe, this seemingly similar pattern, that this dispersal pattern, if you will, that each acts as a fractal of a larger mathematical whole. And once you look at, for example, society on a large perspective, a broad picture, you begin to see that there's a pattern through everything, that everything is cyclical. And obviously, this ties into the algocratic system, the algocracy that they're wishing to bring in. They will seek to harness and manipulate this pattern of perception, if you will, to imprison and entomb the individual within this sort of self-regulating, totally predictable system.
Given that the level of data input into the system is potentially infinite, is it inevitable that we'll become imprisoned in it? That we're walking in, that we're on the video game and we're seeing that building in the distance, and the building is unknowingly, the programmers are watching us, how we watch it. Is it inevitable that we'll end up in this kind of Orwellian kind of situation? And by inevitable, I don't mean in a doomsday sense, but almost in a mathematical systems sense, that these are two lines intersecting and they have to, intertwine or run parallel at a certain point. It's an mathematical inevitability.
In terms of the sine wave of the universe, if you think of it as order and disorder, or order and chaos, which is something we see within the occult, order, abchaos, and what have you. It even goes further. I mean, obviously, always comes back to Sumer and Babylon, but this idea of order and chaos, if you think of it as two lines that are usually run parallel with each other, right? They act, or they run opposite to each other in a curve-like fashion, right? When these two lines intersect at this bottleneck, as you were saying about the allegory of the BAFTA, it's very similar. It hits a bottleneck effect where at that moment, that is, one could say, the reset, and it's occurred throughout history. It's absolutely replete through history, and obviously history is itself largely obfuscated by the writers of said history, but yeah, it has occurred through their history.
Can you kind of clarify what I perceive as a kind of contradiction in this discussion? And on the one hand, as you've said this evening, and I've heard you say it multiple times in the past, that they will not succeed in their endeavor. Yet, as we've just said now, it seems that there's an inevitability that, given this data relationship with our behavior, that we are going to find ourselves imprisoned, as it were. So which of the, is there a contradiction there, or is that a fair summation of our conversation or not?
The cycle that brings about this type of hubris is inevitable. The system prevailing into perpetuity and achieving its goals is not inevitable. In fact, it is impossible. Unless, as Harari states as well, that they go to a sort of inorganic state. I can't see them having the computational power, as you're stating, to process this infinite potential of data, the entire apparatus of the system as we know it, all of these algorithms have to be contained within, firstly, the human mind, then put into software, then put into hardware. So again, everything is physical, it's all materially based. So for us to achieve this inorganic state, we would still have to be contained within the cabling or the hardware systems that allow us to conduct electricity. This system, this natural system, does not require that. We have a sort of ether. There's an energy that colours the air, if you will. There's a natural electricity. There's natural field magnetics. Now, of course, they are making strides in the realm of psychotronics and frequency-based electrical conductivity. But the problem is, it's not to the point yet where, in terms of the public technology that's available to us, don't get me wrong, they could be far advanced from what we are seeing publicly. That's almost a given. But for them to be that advanced, where they can, without the use of any towers, any relay systems, any geographic land-based systems of electrical conductivity cross border, I can't see them bringing in this system that would be perfect, that would be unalterable, that would be itself written into the fabric of nature or overwriting the fabric of nature. However, as I stated, that this type of hubris is part of this termination of the cycle, or that is one phase of the cycle. The cycle never totally terminates, it's eternal, it simply just continues on. Furthermore as well, I honestly see wildcards coming into play, as you're saying. Nature has to, there's a sort of fail-safe to it.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a question in the back of my head a few minutes ago. Like, there are, as the fella says, known knowns and unknown knowns, and then there are unknown unknowns. So I think, as you said, there's wild card. Like, we're in new terrain here? Is that fair to say? We're not in Kansas anymore. Like,
Oh, we're in new terrain, absolutely. I mean, as well when it.
we're literally like messing with the forces of nature here. Like, this is literally.
Oh no, this is them.
This
This is neocolonialism. This is them wishing to colonize nature, in essence. This is what this is.
But they're very dangerous threads that they're pulling at, are they not?
Oh, definitely. I mean, this could spur on an extinction level event. Absolutely. I mean, as well, when I described, entombing, they will entomb us or imprison us. Obviously, I am speaking what they're wishing.
Yeah. Well, it would be a grid. It'll be an inescapable grid. Like, it's. I mean, we're here already. As I see it, we have. Let's take a cross section of. For example, in the Middle East, they build cities now. They set out to build an entire city, and you can imagine the construction of an entire city with, say, 500,000-600,000 workers. And you have all that system of managing that entire project, for example, on a common data environment. Everything's on one system. All the contracts, all the designs, all the money, everything to do with the whole thing. And that's just an example from one industry. And you map that across everything, given the market. Like, how does it even equate to markets where stuff is in competition with other entities? I mean, in a sense, has competition been eradicated, like, or will it be? Or, like, if everything is, for example, in the manufacturing arena, if everything is made in China, and they have market dominance, I mean, the entire system is completely fine-tunable. It's like back to the musical instrument metaphor. It's like the tuning pegs on the top of a guitar headstock. You can tweak it any way you want. I mean, you have literally full control of the whole thing, and there are no borders, and there are no apparent contradictions, or no apparent predators or rivals or competition anywhere. So it seems to me that this is it's there's only one road. But I think, like, I want to say this. A lot of people say, it's negative, or it's a doomsday thing, or you're full of doom and gloom. But I think what we're saying here in the conversation is that, on the contrary, the system itself it has to implode, like as an almost mathematical certainty that it has to implode. Not that it will, or it might, or it could, but that it has to, it's inevitable that it will. And you can almost think of it on a systems level that, as it's going to eat itself. It's literally will implode in on top of itself because it's spinning in an unnatural manner.
What we're actually doing right now is we are the oppositional force to it. We are the countermeasure to it. Honestly, if we get to the point where they start to implant within us, and I hope they haven't done it already, what's theorized to be this of nanotechnology, what's discussed within by DARPA or ex-DARPA scientists, and another individual, I forget his name now, he discusses the weaponization of nanotechnology, in essence, mind control. If they get to that point where they can directly interface our biology with the grid, this internet of things, this internet of bodies, then at that point we have little recourse unless this wild card comes along somewhere down the line. Or again, they implode via a mass amount of civil wars, sporadic civil wars or something between the elite vying for control of this huskified grid of X sentient beings.
To get into the slightly sci-fi kind of side of it, and maybe there is technology, like this concept of mind control, like we're literally in the tinfoil hat territory here, like, not in any ironic sense, but literally we're in here. But like, can we kind of hypothesize that such a technology may not even have to necessitate an implant? That it may be possible to affect neurocognitive networks at the synaptic level, at a very advanced understanding of the human brain, that you actually may be able to affect signal paths within the human brain.
Oh, absolutely, a sort of psychological web of control through various means. That is indeed what we have now, and we have the Lords of Perception are already in power. They understand the human mind and the human psyche, meaning spirit. They understand that to quite a great degree, and they're putting that sort of understanding into direct practical effect. They're doing that right now, of course. But the problem is, as we were talking about these sinusoidal patterns, this sort of sine wave of the universe, these patterns of life and death, the inevitability of order and chaos, or the rise and fall of civilizations. For one to bypass all of that, they must then bypass the control that nature has over our psychology, to break the chains of this symbiosis that we have psychologically and even physically in terms of our bodies and our minds with nature. That has to be broken. Only then will you produce pure predictability. Unless the chains of symbiosis are broken with nature, then you will constantly, no matter how much control, how complex the panopticon system becomes in this world, this global dominion, it will always collapse, it will implode, because the players, or the members of society, the players within this game of society, will constantly be at the mercy of, or under the effects, should we say, of nature, of this symbiotic effect with the sinusoidal wave. So, in essence, it is breaking that connection with God, if you will, if we understand God as the progenitor force of this sinusoidal wave of the universe, that which ordered what was nothingness and all potentiality combined, that which predated Genesis, that which in essence was a sort of a precognition state of the universe as a whole. So yes, the only way for them to enhance their level of control now is we're seeing they're making a push for something, and it's an enhancement of control. Therefore, the only real tangible enhancement that they could go for is direct control of the human mind, which is the prism of, or the aperture of the spirit. Again, as we were stating with the double slit experiment, it's that which changes the perception of the world of form, which changes the world of form really around it. So if one controls that directly, the mind, which is the gateway to this of the spirit into the physical world, and the spirit is in essence the physical world. If we understand the spirit to be but a fractal of this progenitor order and force of the universe, that is God, then for them to control the mind, they thus control the middleman between the physical and spiritual realms. In essence, they become de facto the lords of the earth, the lords of the physical world, the true lords of perception. We see with the Neuralink technology as well. They stated that to keep a sort of constant control of the individual to get past the barrier of the skull, to keep that constant feed with the control center, that one did require an implantation, but I really, I hope not.
But the even starker reality is you may not need it. You may not need it because if you have infinite control of the system, for example, let's take you know, Johnny Mondeo. He's Mr. Middle Class Ordinary Guy. He could be from Ireland or England or Scotland, or perhaps he's French, German, whatever. He's the art. Let's just create a standard hypothetical person. Now they know how much diesel he puts in his car, how much he earns per week, what his mortgage or rent repayments are, what his bills are, what he spends on food, how much downtime he has, what his spending habits are, what health issues he has, what his past history is, what he'd have done right or wrong, what his bloodline is, what his DNA type is, who are his family members, what group does he, like the amount of data you have on that guy is absolutely intense. So he is the proverbial Skinnerian rat in the maze. And you can watch, you have an opportunity to study literally every single aspect of his behavior output. And you can see how every aspect of his behavioral output, i.e. what he does on a day-to-day basis, is influenced by the inputs and by the world around him, rather. So with that level of monitoring, and you marry that onto to complete social control, shall we say, you have large, if not complete, swathes of power in the corporate environment, in workplaces, in financial institutions, in methods of production, in the organizations of government, etc., education, the media he consumes, etc. So over time, you have an absolute brilliant case study in human behavior. So if he's jumping to the left and you want him to jump to the right, you will just study, well, why is he jumping to the left? Well, he's jumping to the left because of inputs A, B, and C. Right, says you. Well, how do I get him to jump to the right? Well, if you were able to subject him to inputs D, E, and F, he'd be more likely to jump to the right. And you just push the button, and away you go. And lo and behold, he jumps to the right. And you needed no brain chip. Because you have complete control. And not just on him, but you have recourse to data on characters like him, perhaps in the multitudes of millions. And you can train, your algorithm is feeding off all that data simultaneously with vast, unknown computational power or algorithmical power. So, I mean, the sky's the limit.
That is the system that they possess now. The problem is, though, when you're attempting to create a system that's self-regulating, that, again, is this closed negative feedback loop system in total predictability. And again, this is to protect them from the cyclical resets of history. Again, nature sort of takes her course. they're attempting to impede nature. This goes very deep into the occult, but I won't touch on that. This sort of war between the divine male and the divine feminine. But
Well, we can look at it even on the terms of physics. Like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and that's a kind of archetypal natural force in nature. So as you push one way, there, as you say, it's deep within the occult, but it's also there's a more obvious way of looking at it. In a sense, it's like there has to be reaction, and on a level of energy.
I think that's what they're attempting to control.
You mentioned there just briefly, you said there's a deeper level in the occult on that kind of side of thing. You hinted at something there. Can you maybe go a bit?
In Sumeria, we and I mean this is the world over. We see a develop, and we see within the Norse pantheon as well. You see it with the Aesir and the Vanir gods, but the primordial deities at the head of the pantheon. I mean, this is probably. I think this is something to do with probably agriculture and agrarianism and the development of it within human history. But we see that the mother nature, or the, what do you call it, the sort of divine mother figure, she was always at the head of the pantheon. That then inverted, probably around the time, because we see it in Sumer, it was a slow osmosis where we see, for example, Anu, he became head of the pantheon, if you will. And it's this sort of patriarchal oppression, to use a feminist term, against the divine mother or mother nature. And we see it today, obviously, in a weird sense where they're attempting to fight against mother nature.
But to flesh out the point, like Mother Nature gets her own back, you know. As Mike Tyson once said, memorably, like everybody's got plans until they get hit, and I think she's gonna hit, like.
Absolutely. And the problem is when you have a centralized hierarchy of control and you have this sort of rigid plan, because it has to be a rigid plan. And we're not talking about the Internet of Things here, we're talking about this just conspiracy to the transition of this new system. We can speculate on what it is, but they have to have a rigid plan for this to succeed, for them to collectively pull together all of these conspirators and their energies towards to push towards this new system. Then again, as you're saying, they're all great plans until they come into contact with the enemy, and then they fall apart. And then you have to switch around the variables. You have to sort of react on the fly to the enemy.
Well, there's another quick angle on that, is because the system will be so standardized, eventually normalized and rigid, to use your word. It's completely, in the natural sense, out of balance. It's imbalanced. So the opposing force that it may, as we kind of feel we're talking about here, that it will eventually meet, will necessarily be chaotic. So to put that point in a different way, if you remove, give yourselves 200 years down the line, or 3 or 4, 500, 7 or 1,000 years down the line, and let's suppose this system will establish itself, let's suppose over a 2,000 year period, 2 or 3,000 years, and eventually until the shit hits the fan. But what will hit the fan will be necessarily absolute chaos, because when you remove that system, because of the nature of its how do you say, systemic kind of, what's the word you use? It's kind of stagnant, monolithic, immovability. It's a pillar. But when you hit that pillar, the whole house is going to come crashing down. So, as you said there, Silas, earlier on in the conversation, you used the term extinction level event. Like when the shit hits the fan, it really will hit the fan. Like, this is going to be an absolute. Now, my 2 cents on it is that this is a long way off. I do think, like, because this is like, as the National Socialists were envisaging a 2,000-year Reich, which failed and ended up in the annihilation of Germany and all the rest of it. but that what they're envisaging with this is along that type of timeline. They're thinking in terms of thousands of years, if not, as you say, uh, what's the word you use for the system is self-regulating? I keep forgetting that. I was going to say osteoporosis, which is autopoiesis. Poiesis. Um,
I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, if it's once you take away that pathway to vent out the tension or the steam, if you will, it the within the system it builds up, and eventually the pressure, like a pressure cooker, eventually it increases and increases and increases. If you leave it, the lid will blow off the system.
well, there's that one, or there's the other potential, right? That the system implodes, that you get this kind of cancer situation, that it rots from within, that it just, I was back to that kind of that image of that character who was you know it's 400 years from now, and this guy is a senior civil servant. He's like in the Orwellian kind of character in 1984, and he loves the system. He loves Big Brother. He wears the uniform. He's been working at the local government department for 20 years. He gossips about all the people in the office. He tells on anyone that he thinks is against Big Brother. He watches what you're saying. He watches whether you salute when the local representative comes on the screen, and if you don't salute in time, he sends an email, senior management, etc., etc. But the point I'm trying to make is that character deep down inside is dying and or dead within himself or herself, and there's a kind of a rot there. And if you apply like a force multiplier to that character and say, right, what kind of society is this? That it's necessarily a weak society, ironically, because it's existed outside of nature.
As well, we see it throughout history. I mean, communism is a perfect example of this. In any system that goes against nature, it doesn't really matter how much technology you have. Eventually, nature will find a way. And the problem is, it's because though they may change their physical bodies, even their mental capacity, their mental configuration via biodigital implantations, they can never actually change that sort of innate part of oneself. One could call it their perception, their awareness, their consciousness, their sentience. That is intrinsically linked to nature. So as you're saying, nature herself is the cancer. It's the all assimilating force. It is the internet of all things. And this internet of things is in direct competition with nature. And as we were speaking about in the beginning, any algorithm that is met with true competition, it can be calibrated to a higher degree, to a far more accurate and precise degree, to then regulate the competition, to destroy the competition, if you will. And this is what nature seems to create. It creates this competition for itself to then, in essence, assimilate it, destroy it, and learn from it.
So, like, potentially what we're seeing is some prolapsed aspect of nature that nature has still birthed, as it were, or kind of quasi-aborted, or created this in order for her to reassert herself, or as such, to rid herself of something impure, and to burn off impurity, and to be reborn. Is that?
I tend to think of that as the larger, broader picture of this, yeah. Obviously, as well, if we are all fractal expressions of nature, and she is acting vicariously through us, or we could think of it as God, or whatever you wish to think of it as, the source code. If that's acting vicariously through us, then of course we still have to warn others. So we have to convey to them what, these absolutely insane psychopaths like Harari and Schwab and the rest of them are stating. So we still need to, we can't relent.
But by virtue of the fact that you and I are talking, if we're to follow the trajectory of thinking on this, it is literally it's echoing through us right now, and but it is a natural force in a sense. It will come when it comes in the form it comes, and it will be inevitable. There'll be an inevitable counter maneuver to this counter energy, contrary force to this whole movement of data and dataism and centralized power.
Certainly, yeah, I do think so, and we see it within the theology of most human civilizations. And well, for example, Revelation. I mean, it exists within all the Abrahamic religions. It exists even within all the sort of extinct religions as well. You know, Mesopotamian religions, the Norse religions. It all exists. Ragnarok, for example. You know, this inevitability.
But do you think that this, if we were to consider that all these things were these mythological cycles of floods and ancient civilizations that were getting wiped out and were like that, they may have gone through the same cycle, and if so, um, you know, is the technology, the zeros and ones and the data, was that potentially a key part of the downfalls of those older civilizations?
I do think so, yeah. I mean, the Tower of Babel, if you look at it mythologically, it's it's really discussing technology, and technology, and there's other aspects to it, but a primary aspect is technology, that they're attempting to ascend to the heavens. We see it within Isaiah 14:12, if I recall correctly. It discusses this idea of Lucifer. Helen Shin Bakar, I think is the Hebrew. So the light bringer, the shining one. This idea that he will ascend above heaven, and obviously is smote down by God. But it's the same thing. I mean, Atlantis as well. If you see the Rishat structure, this sort of massive deluge, this flood that was anomalous. It just sort of came from nowhere. The geologists seem to report to its existence about 12,000 years ago, and it seriously just ripped the bedrock right from this Rishat structure, which is theorized to be Atlantis. So potentially a similar thing occurred there. Technological hubris, if you will.
So is it facetious to say that potentially they could have had a computer type technology in Atlantis?
Well, I don't know for a fact, but I can only speak to the sort of geological evidence in the Rishat structure if we theorize it to be Atlantis.
Or to phrase the question in a different way, um, is it very far out there, like to try and think that the technology itself, i.e., computers, software, algorithms, internet, interconnectivity, dataism, is an inevitable outcome of human technological development? A, and B, if it is inevitable, that it may have been there before, that human beings may have found them. There may have been previous human societies that eventually got wiped out through, as you say, an extinction level event that may have had technology that we're looking at now, the Orwellian society. Do you think that's too far out there, or do you think that there's possible truth in that, or is that way too sci-fi?
No, no, they're fantastic questions actually, and it's things I've thought upon, and it's things I include in my new book. And I see everything within nature cyclically, so nothing is linear. I don't really. I think I really can't think of anything in nature. If you look at it on a larger, in a sort of broader perspective, none of it is linear. It's all cyclical. So I do think technology is similar in that regard. Technology is cyclical. So we have, again, it rhymes, so we've probably had some sort of computational systems previously, even if they were mechanical. Obviously, if we understand as well certain problems within the natural world that human beings wish to overcome. Again, this idea of sort of corralling nature into our will instead of following the will of nature. If we look at the problems, the solutions to said problems throughout history, they've typically always been the same. There's been small caveats of difference here and there. The technologies, the innovations that are brought out, the solutions to the problems, the natural problems that face us as a species, our solutions are always the same. So it isn't far out there to state that digitalism is probably a pathway, generally and broadly speaking, not just in the computational arena, if you will, but digitalism is a philosophy, because that's what Harari seems to view it as. That is most certainly a pathway of progression, cyclical pathway of progression throughout these sorts of larger macro cycles of, say, resets and great resets and what have you.
But is it way out there to think that a digital system may have existed?
Oh no, not at all. I mean, we see in the Ural Mountains, there's what was it? It was some sort of. I have it in some book that I have actually. Provides an illustration as well. It's found in the Ural Mountains within, I'm pretty sure, the 1960s, where within what they claim to be it was found in this strata of rock. I forget how long ago it was. Several thousands of years anyway. They found it circuitry and basically nanotechnology, nano composites and nano objects.
I have this kind of almost Twilight Zone episode idea kind of in my head, and it's of society sort of mutates and morphs and spins into this Orwellian technological dataist dystopian thing where everything is connected, and you have Uncle Noah Harari. We all jump on Noah's Ark, and all the data is. We're fed all. We feed the system with all data on everything. Literally anything you think, you do, or all human aspects of endeavor and human will are fed into the system, and then the entire system links up to a single USB key, the mother of all USB keys. So once you have enough information, all on this USB key, you plug it out, put it in your briefcase, and you hit the nuclear destruct button. And you wipe out humanity, and you just walk out of there with your briefcase, and you know everything in that little chip in your briefcase. And you take a couple of clutch samples of humans, and you start breeding them again somewhere on a desert island. But you don't tell them anything, but you know everything, right? And you just breed the whole society back up again. But you're the one in the know, if you know what I mean. You've got the technology, you've got it all. And I think like it's a bit Twilight Zoney, but it's like, when you look into the occult, the typical conspiracy theory thing when you start off is like it's the big families who ruled Europe, who were the money lenders into Europe, right? You start there. Then you go into people like Michael Tsarian and co, who I don't know much about Mr. Tsarian, what his actual background is, but some of his information is quite interesting. That it wasn't, and his kind of idea is that it's got nothing to do with the big money lender families, whose names we all know. They're a front. What we're actually dealing with here is what he calls the Black Lodge, the hidden few, if you will. Now that's a whole other ballgame, which anyone who's listening, or those of us who've looked into it, even on a cursory glance, will see that it's very deep, very dark, very complex. It requires a lot of understanding, even to get your head around the basics of it. But I think it's something that it's ground we inevitably seem to trample on. And I find myself scratching my head going, is this stuff real or what? Like, or how... but it seems like, we've said it in previous conversations, Silas, that the power structure in the old world, like if you took a compass and put it in the middle of the one point of the compass on the map in the middle of the Eastern Mediterranean, and drew a circle around, on it, you'd take into that circle, you'd take in Greece, Italy, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, all in just one swoop. So you have all those old empires there. You have the Egyptian, dynasties. You have Judea, the Israelites, the Jews. You have the Roman Empire. You have Greece, etc., etc. And you just it seems that human history seems to, and the power structure seems to have its familial or connections or its power origins in that area, and everything sprung from there. It would seem, at least in the modern sense, and by modern I mean in the last 5,000 years.
Manasseh, he was the priest that discussed Atlantis with what would have been the fourth hand account that Plato was using when he discussed Atlantis in the Timaeus and Critias. But the Egyptian priest Manasseh discusses or outright states that Egypt was founded by refugees from Atlantis. I mean, believe that for what you will, but it seems to raise this idea of what you were discussing there, that they wished as a reset of in many ways it is a reset, and they wish to start again, a clean slate, if you will. There was something else I was going to discuss on that point. I totally forgot.
I remember coming across it somewhere that there was some mention or ancient writing of that the ancient royalty of Egypt had, quote, red hair and blue eyes.
Oh yes, they found many. I think it was Tutankhamun, if I remember correctly, that the haplogroup that he was a part of was, well, in essence, European, but not just Mediterranean. It was specifically, I think it was Nordic. He had red hair himself, obviously very strange. In New Zealand as well, they are, I forget their term for it, but it's akin to the fairy folk. The pre-Maori inhabitants of New Zealand are said to have green and blue eyes and blonde hair. One could say a sort of Indo-European peoples, probably closely linked to the Persians. However, with the haplogroup we saw of Tutankhamun, he seemed to exhibit a more northern European extraction, which there's absolutely no mention of this on the media, of course, this profound fact. Another link with sort of European culture found anomalously throughout antiquity in areas that it really shouldn't be, according to official history, of course, is actually something found within the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it links to Old Irish. And I found this very strange. I found this just today. Another name for Satan within the Old Testament. There's a book within the Dead Sea Scrolls titled The War of the Sons of Light and Darkness. Very similar to the Revelation. It's almost a sort of proto-Revelation book, and it discusses the army of Belial, the sons of darkness. Now, another name for Belial in an older, archaic form of this is Matan Bucus. Now, as we were discussing Lucifer and the Morning Star and all this, the Shining One, Matan Bucus is very close to an Old Irish term, and I'm going to I apologise, I'm going to murder this pronunciation.
Don't apologise, because I might murder it after you. Go ahead.
Matantus, right, which means of the morning, which is very peculiar. And as well, we have Bucus, or Buke can mean star. So again, the morning star. It's very strange. It's this sort of same idea. It just keeps reoccurring.
But we see it this time. I mean, this stuff we get all the time about Lucifer, the light, the awakening. This terminology. To me, it's all got to do. It seems to point toward knowledge, occult knowledge, but not what is, those terms are so overused. Occult knowledge. What is that? It's information. It's ultimately data. So, if there was a system of recording, hint, digital, from the ancient world, or perhaps not even digital as we know it, but some other format that perhaps used a similar type of concept to develop a technology, which may be a distant cousin of what we now call digital, but may have had the same archetypal conceptual naissance, if you will. But perhaps such a technology existed, because as we know, knowledge is power. So if you have enough knowledge, you have your great Luciferic awakening, and you have the capacity to control.
Oh, certainly, yeah. I think they see data. I mean, this sort of ties back with the initial sort of spark of this discussion. I think data ties back with God, that knowledge, like the Sephiroth, Chokmah, or wisdom or knowledge, is the sort of position of God. That it is all potentiality, but it is all potentiality ordered. So again, we can see it within the architecture of mathematics, that everything is patterned. The dispersal of everything that we see, even us, what we're doing right now. I have to admit, I have to be honest with you. A lot of what I'm actually covering now, even Tessarian, I looked at his work maybe, I don't know, what, even 3, 4 years ago, and I didn't really understand half of it. And now looking back, in the past, 2 years, I think I've learnt more than I have in the past 10. And I mean, what's sort of pushing us to, down this path? Even doing this, I would have never contemplated.
Well, there seems to be a very, very strange kind of characteristic around uh, learning and knowledge. It's like I could tell you, somebody tells you, it's as if it takes a while for stuff to sink in, or for awareness to come, or as you said, you can look at a field of information and go, what the hell are they talking about, or what's he on about, or what does that even mean, or how do I? But and you have to walk away from it, and it's like, but 2 or 3 years later, or 4 years later, you may have heard a similar story from slightly different sources, and then you go back to the original source and you go, ah, now I get it. Now, because that relates to that, and this other thing relates to this thing over here, and you slowly sort of begin to. But as you were hinting at there, there's almost like a kind of a, how do you say this gently? Like you can get the feeling there's a force, or a kind of a guidance, or a sense of something else that's slowly unveiling.
Do you know what it is? It's almost. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Zio. It's almost like our free will is but an illusion. It's almost like we don't have free will. We're pushed down certain paths. We don't really have. I mean, one could say fate. It's fate or what have you, but I mean that. I mean that's quite a grandiose term. But we're compelled to do things by forces that we can't comprehend, that are even unfathomable to us, that are beyond what we would perceive to be materially true. It's Yet they exert their will on us, and we are almost like their instrument. And obviously, the oppositional force are an instrument of probably that same will. And again, it's like nature is creating her own dialectic, her own arena, in which, from the blood of the chaos, it will create the fertile grounds for something to be birthed anew. The sort of bottleneck effect, where it will spring forth, a greater abundance of life.
But as you kind of like, it's maybe like free will, or sorry, your will to, having free will is sort of a corollary of your inner self, of the will of your inner self, i.e., the capacity to decide, or to know which. But that inner self is itself on a path. So moving from A to B. So if its capacity to decide when it was at A is different now that it's at B, and that transitory path is an inner path of development that you go through in your life. Stuff happens. You have challenges. You have successes. You have failures. You fall. You rise. You learn. You make mistakes. You're on this trajectory of providence, the path of the fool. So like your actual will is shifting all the time, relative to where you are on that path. And to put it simply, a decision you might have made in one direction 10 years ago, you definitely wouldn't make today. So how was your will actually free at all, if you know what I mean? Um, uh, it comes to mind the Norns. I think there were Norse mythology. These three female characters that spun the fate of men, the destiny of men. They're depicted as working at the spinning wheel, and they're spinning this loom, this woolen thread, and the thread is the life of man. I think I'm right in this mythological kind of. And at one point, then there's one of them with a scissors, and she decides, when it's time for you to check out, she cuts. But it's a very interesting overarching point, and dare I say it without sounding cliched, I think the druid or the shamanic kind of perspective on all this, i.e., the one who looks at it over the course of millions of years, not just looks at, we'll say, what's happening in 2022. How did the 20th century arrive at us at this point, and where are we likely headed in the next 50, 100 years or 500 years? But the wider perspective is looking at the stuff over millions of years, and not just over historical time, but is also looking at it in terms of providence, fate, destiny, massive archetypal underpinning forces, nature, man, will, consciousness, technology. These are massive forces. The wizard is on the stormy mountain with his hands outstretched, and these forces are chaotically intertwining. They're waltzing around each other. They're at war, clashing off each other like a vast ocean swell smashing into a cliff. There's lightning bolts. This is a heady cauldron concoction of all this energy and these moving forces. And I think that in my head, that archetypal wizard character understands it on some real primal level, like almost like in not a consciousness level where he's not even deploying conscious thought. He can kind of feel it, like, you know what I mean? He's sensing this, like.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think as well, the closer we, or the more we progress down these sort of larger cycles, I think this idea of a quickening, to steal a phrase from that Highlander film, there's a sort of quickening that we feel more compelled to do, follow certain paths and to proceed down a certain trajectory of travel. Digressing back to the point you made regarding the Norns, very interesting regarding the Norns as well. I mean, they're seen within the Hellenic world, the Sisters of Fate, where they cut the threads. Now, strangely enough, when they're spinning the threads, it's very similar to what we see in the Sumerian and Babylonian and even Mesopotamian and Semitic religions, where we see what's called the Apsu in Babylonian, or the Abzu in Sumerian. This what's really the cosmic ocean. It's everything. And we have also, in terms of data, the stream of data depicted in terminology that would link it to, say, water or a stream or current, or again this ocean. Very very similar. Again, the thread. I'm pretty sure that exists within Odin as well. So again, it's very strange, this sort of confluence of terminology, and it seems like this data is fate, is this sort of timeline, is trying to imitate nature in a certain way. Oh, and also the etymology of God, or G-O-T-T, and usually most Germanic languages, the etymology of God from Proto-Indo-European, it means to pour. So again, water, very, very peculiar, the overlap.
I had a little moment there. I share something personal. Sometimes when I go camping, I go up the woods, and I light a campfire, and for long passing moments, I will just sit by the fire and I don't think. And there's just something about being in proximity to that force of nature, and the relationship between combustion and growth, timber, and how one devours, and how something that was produced from the earth, as it were, like, and um, it kind of leaves you speechless, I think, in a sense, when you really stand back and look at things in that sense, But I think it's a kind of a sensibility that's going to be important for. I don't know. I think it's very important for people to kind of be aware of it, or sort of cultivate some bit of that in themselves, because we're in sort of confusing times, and I do think as well that the machinery of this system, it's creating an environment which is not. It's not great for people. It's not great to be a human being with feelings and hopes and dreams and trying to live a life and be healthy, be happy. I think it's a system that's, as the man says, you'll own nothing and be happy. I wonder. I mean, maybe they'll just postmodernize the concept of what happiness is, and they'll brainwash the population into thinking, well, you are happy, or maybe medicate them into it, or who knows, But as you say, as you intimate there, these forces generally in any system sort of exist in an oppositional sense, in balance, ultimately. So perhaps, there's a whole new type of human being that's going to there's going to arise up through the cracks of this system. That will be visionary people. That will be self-determined. They'll be leaders. They'll be absolutely fervent Joan of Arc type characters. They'll kind of sprout up through the cracks between the zeros and ones. They'll flower, through those cracks, and because that system will be so monolithic and grey, like that, their presence will be, they'll stand out, and that again, it's back to the musician kind of metaphor, Hendrix and Miles Davis. They can't help but, the algorithm will not be able to normalize them because they'll just be too big. So I kind of sense that could be coming down the line, and that may take the form of a new type of rebellion, be it in a kind of cyber information type sense, in a propaganda sense, in an information sense, but ultimately like in a consciousness sense as well, that they will literally think differently. And I think that kind of stuff is coming down the line. I think right now we're at the foothills of the new normalization. We're heading into the normalization, and it's happening to us in ways that we can't sort of avoid, because it's in the workplace, for example. It's in your workforce, how you do business. If you want to have a job, you're kind of inadvertently in it. You step in your car in the morning, you put your key in the ignition. You've got a climate crisis on four wheels. The car beeps at you to tell you to put on the seatbelt. Your phone is Bluetooth and attaching onto the radio. There's emails coming in on the phone. You stop at the traffic lights, the car cuts out because it's saving on emissions. You have to hit the clutch to get going again. And it's like, you're already there. Like, we're already here, pretty much. Like the plug has been pulled in the bathtub, and we are heading into this. I think we know it. I think deep down society knows it. People know it, and because there's still a bit of them in this generation, in this time, that remembers the old world or is of the old world. But I think in a generation or two's time, they won't even think that way. They'll have it. They will be hyper normalized to it. So. Let's see. Let's see what. Yeah.
As you say, there is always the potential of a wild card. There's been stranger reversals within history.
Yeah.
Let's hope. We can only hope.
Well, I think if you were to look at it in a systems kind of perspective, like as a mathematical set of variables on a table, if you bang that white ball into those red balls, one of them is possibly going to go down a hole somewhere. You know what I mean? So the wild card situation it's a certainty. It's a certainty. It's the potential for the variable when and where it will arise may be unpredictable, will be unpredictable, and the format it'll take, etc., etc. But it's a certainty that you will have a contrary force and wildcards, etc., etc. And because of the grey linear nature of the whole thing, they're going to be even more powerful than they would have been in a more normalized society where the grassroots normal sort of contrary forces are popping up from time to time here and there. So it's like, it's no really big deal. We get the fact that you're totally outside the box and you're going to completely revolutionize the society around you. But we have had one or two other characters who are a little bit similar to you, so it's nothing really new. Whereas in this system, those type characters are just going to have explosive potential, and it remains to be seen how that would pan out. And just like, again, back to the sci-fi stuff, like, given the unprecedented nature of what we're dealing with and how these natural forces are like going to lead us into unknown territory, do you think there's any possibility for like phenomenon to occur, be it on a social or on a perception level, or perhaps in the science kind of side of things? We're talking about the Hadron Collider, or mass events in popular consciousness, psychosis. Like, what if you marry your brain to technology? What happens if that brain brings in human trauma or psychosis or catatonic kind of schizophrenic conditions, fear, panic? What happens when what are we talking about here? Like, what happens to human emotion?
One would believe that if you, well, for example, if you look at Aldous Huxley, he was talking about the sort of pharmacological control of these, what they would call a sort of imbalance of the homeostasis, which we call emotions. So what we're discussing now in the Internet of Things is basically a control of it via psychotronics, potentially, or via just perception management. What the problem with that is, yes, there would be some residue from, in terms of human emotion, still existent within that Internet of Things.
I like that word, residue.
Absolutely, yes. Well, that's where the sort of wild card.
Phenomena.
Yes. Yep.
The uncanny. There's a term that creeps into computer programming sometimes. It's phenomena. Or in photography, perhaps, for any digital media where you store something, like where you have aspects, say, in a picture or a piece of recorded media that are not necessarily what we're taking in, but are due to some glitch potentially in the system. I can't think of the word off the top of my head, but let's stick with phenomena for now. Or your word, residue. There is another word that's more of a commonly used word that might come into my head in a second. But like, this is back to the chaos magic kind of stuff and the perception. Like, is it possible that somewhere in the middle of all this whirlpool, and this is getting into a little bit into the makey-uppy, a little bit into the sci-fi kind of stuff, but that you might actually end up opening a bit of a hole somewhere? And it may be partially to do with perception, but as you say, if there's residuals in the system that are byproducts of human emotion, perhaps, or human spirit, as it were, is it not likely somehow that they have energy too, and thereby they must have data?
Data itself is energy. I mean, even on that idea of the residual of, say, emotions of what you're saying, really negative emotions. If the Internet of Things, I mean, it's a very vague concept right now. I mean, even Harari, he discusses it, but he leaves it sort of open ended. I mean, what is it? Is it a global brain? Is it a hive mind? If it's a global brain, then all of that residual negative human emotion basically becomes sort of, it becomes encrypted, but it becomes sort of passed through it passes through the entire system like a ripple effect. If indeed everyone is interconnected.
But we could say the same about human condition of love, hope, joy. They're in there too. They've got to be in there too somewhere on some level. And this is back to a concept that I came across in. It's actually, you'll find it quite a bit in Japanese horror of all places. If you go into Japanese folklore and Japanese horror stories, there's quite a superstition in Japan around objects. And you find this in like horror stories. If you do a little bit of homework on basically folklore in Japan and short stories that may have been written in the horror genre in Japan, you'll say, okay, a kettle, and it's an everyday object, a kettle or a shoe or a jacket or some literally everyday household object that's beyond a certain age. Say it's more than 100 years old or whatever. They're superstitious about it because it's got to do with matter and energy. So, for example, I collect from time to time little bits of little military antiques, and I've got a couple of badges. I've got little stuff that was from World War One, World War Two. Nothing too expensive, but from time to time I'll find something. Might be simple, like a photo, a little piece of uniform kit, or whatever. But from time to time I'll get something, and I'll hold it in my hand, and I can kind of feel something off it. It's like really weird. It's a kind of spooky thing. And it's got to do with the transfer of human emotional energy into objects. Now, in the West, we probably know it most commonly as like the haunted house phenomenon, right? Something happens in a house and then the house becomes haunted. Well, how the hell did that happen? Like the incident, and we're talking kind of the stereotypical haunted, something happened in the house 100 years ago, right? And we stayed in the house in recent times and we saw a ghost in the corridor, the old lady who ran the inn, who killed her husband and she was hung. She still haunts the corridors of the inn because her spirit. So you're into a whole other thing here. Like you're into a whole other ballgame. Like this field of information, data, energy, eventually emotion is going to open up something. Like, I mean, the sky's the limit with this thing, from what I can see.
That goes into field magnetics. You feel the atmosphere of things. Again, things have, a residue about them. I'm thinking of the Divok box as well, in Jewish folklore as well. We see a similar thing in, sort of, it's talismanic. These talismans as well. It's so it certainly exists, of course. I mean, what you can even feel it in the air. The air contains a certain residual emotional charge. I mean, if you walk into a room and it's awkward and it's just silent, nobody's saying anything. There may be a bit of body language, but I mean, it's extremely. Well, actually, it's almost like their body language has projected the emotion outwards, which is a sort of strange concept to wrap one's head around. That silence itself and mere body language, pierce this sort of field with emotional charge, if you will. So yes, I do agree. This CERN and everything else. I mean, these are the sorts of extinction level events I'm discussing. The things that they're dabbling with, and I mean even the issues that they may cause in terms of field disturbance or field magnetic disturbance or anything like that.
But like it's back to the kind of unknown stuff and the residuals and the phenomena. Like, is it possible that instead of regulating and containing and acting as a god to nature, that they may actually inadvertently end up magnifying certain aspects of it and projecting it onto themselves and creating some sort of like a Pandora's box kind of thing where they'll go, holy fuck, we didn't expect that. What the hell's gone on there? That the zeros and ones are going to be haunted, in essence. And I mean, it sounds fantastical, but I mean, literally. Now you said it, yeah, literally. And I think with that amount of human endeavor encoded doesn't it seem somewhat kind of inevitable that you're going to have, as you said, a residual, or the ghost in the machine is going to be a weird factor? And but then again, maybe they know that because it's, I hear so much about the occult and the spiritual stuff around the occult, and for years I've always said to myself, yeah, but where is it? Like, where are devils? Where are spirits? Where are these things? Like, I hear so much talk about them, but where are they? I've never, you know, witnessed them. Are we talking sort of on a hypothetical kind of a theoretical level? Is that what they're talking about? But maybe they are actually talking, because it's like back to that chaos magic thing of looking into matter and spirit, and you're actually starting to mess with all those concepts, and you're like an artist in a sense with the color palette, mixing them together and blurring the lines and flinging them on the canvas, and the form emerges. So it's kind of like a system where it's like Michelangelo with the block of marble. Like, they're hacking away at the chips, and the form slowly emerges to them. They didn't start with the concept of what they were going to create, but some form will emerge. Like, you see these guys who carve things out of pieces of wood, and they see the initial shape in the knot in the wood and the twist of the branch, and they use that as a start point, and then they create the face. It was like it was always there, but they used the pareidolia effect to see the face and then bring it out further. Like, it's strange types of phenomena, I think, maybe possible.
In a way, it's a quickening for them as well. They, as you're saying, they're doing this by, I guess, experimentation, if you will. They're doing it by, feeling out the system and what it may look like in its form and that. Yes, absolutely, yeah.
But as like, it's back, like, if you have everything in a box, if you have the components for any given machine in a box, you can kind of create anything. You put your hand in and pull out a fist of components. You don't know what, and fire them into the machine, and you just, like, you have the power to create. Like, you have limitless material. Like, limitless material to create from. You can be the sculptor or the artist or whatever, because the amount of available, it's not telling you what to make or create. You can just, pull the information out and put it together and shape things in ways you may not have yourself foreseen.
I would say as well on that, the artist has the power to create, but creation and destruction are constantly intermingling. So I mean, the art, well, for example, the sculptor may be chipping away at the marble, but he hits it in the incorrect spot. The marble is weak at that spot, and it crumbles, and then it's a sort of knock-on chain effect, and the entire sculpture breaks in half. Similar thing with the wood. He does not foresee a certain a path of the grain within the wood. It may be weak in certain parts. He cuts it, and it snaps off. And this is the issue that we have with this system.
Well, the thing is, right, and it's probably getting a little bit kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? But, like, as the jazz musician, is like Herbie Hancock says, there's no wrong notes. Or as the sculptor, the artist, right? He's chipping away, and he breaks the sculpture in two halves, and fuck, I'm after wrecking this fucking thing. And he cries for the night, but he comes back the next day and he looks at it, and you know what? He goes, that crack bit there actually looks like another face, almost, if I hold it to the light. And he starts chipping away, and slowly he takes, and the thing becomes this Janus face, two-face kind of thing materializes out from that which was, quote, quote, broken. So it's like this, now you're into the or the infinite spiral of, there's no, yeah, exactly, you can't go wrong. You can only be wrong if you started out saying, I want to do this, and you went to do it and it didn't work, and you go, shit, no, I failed. No, I didn't fail. It just take as far as you've gone. Okay, you didn't go to point X, but if you change a couple of variables, you could bring it off to point Y. So now the process has started leading you. Do you know what I mean? You're as you said earlier on, you're an instrument of it, like. And perhaps there's a bit of that going on at the dare I say it, at the I hate using those words elite, but at the structure, assuming there is a power structure and a central point, which again, by the way, is a bit of a leap for a lot of people, myself included. But I'm increasingly thinking that it is centralized, it is unipolar, and then there is a day somewhere. Now, exactly what exact shape or form, I don't know. But perhaps they're playing this kind of game, and this is God for them. This actually been at this creative uh, edifice and been able to manipulate things, and there's a joy in it, in that creative space, if you will, to play God or to be the artist, or to have that much. There is a sort of a joy in it, but the vision they have, I think, is
Well, Harari states that they want to totally know of the power and obviously apply and harness the powers of creation and destruction. That's that's basically in essence what they wish, and not just creation and destruction on all levels.
well. It brings me, it brings me to a thing that it was a passing comment that another commentator, Michael Black. I know you're familiar with Michael Black. He said, look, he was kind of saying in one of his chats, and he said, let you in a bit of a secret. These people worship, these being the power structure, worship the primal force in the universe, which is creative and destructive in one. They see that which came from the ether as being secondary to the ether, and the ether being constructive and destructive forces in chaotic abundance in the eternal walls. They see that as being the God, if you will, or the greatest, not which came from it. So that which came from it, the creative, how do you say, the artist's painting was not. It's not the Mona Lisa. It was the moment before the guy put the paintbrush to the canvas. That electric moment of what will I paint? You know what I mean? Where the thing just came through you. It was go back to the musician thing, or you know, it was that moment. It's a moment like
That goes back to obviously Sumer, the Apsu or Apsu, the true like total potential of everything, that which predated God or Anu or whatever term we wish to ascribe. Apsu is where our term, or Absu is where our term abyss comes from. You obviously have Apollyon or Abaddon, which means the destroyer. In Revelation chapter 9 verse 11, chapter 9 verse 11 is quite a significant number, should we say. It states that they were ruled by a king, the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon. Well, this pretty much links with Enki. Enki was stated to have had a temple, if I think I'm correct in saying it was in the southern city of Eridu in Sumer, and it was called Iabzu, or the Temple of the Abyss. And within this temple, this House of the Deep Waters, or Temple of the Deep Waters, it was located on the edge of a swamp. And within it, it had tanks of holy water within the courtyards, in these sorts of basins. Again, that's something that's continued on into the mikvots within the synagogue, the washing pools within the mosques, even the baptismal font as well. Furthermore, as well, Sumerian god Enki, or in Akkadian or Babylonian Ea, the lord of the earth and the lord of water, he was believed to have lived in the Absu, the deep water, quite literally, since before human beings were created. Therefore, Abaddon, or Apollyon, is merely an epithet for Enki, of whom is the king of the abyss. Furthermore, as well, Enki links with Prometheus, which in turn links with Lucifer, in this sort of recurrent Luciferian spirit, that which seeks to, in essence, eat or take from the tree of life as well, as it is stated by God in Genesis 3:22, if I recall correctly, using technology to bypass the parameters, the confines that have been set within the natural world. This is what is seen within Genesis 3:22, as I stated. Again, this is another, as we're seeing these chapters and verses showcase very important and symbolic numbers in the tie-in with occult numerology and also gematria. Significant values in gematria, and not just gematria, the entire geometry and fabric of the world, as it is detailed in mathematics, that is. So we have Genesis 3:22. We should all understand the significance of 3:22. And it states in 3:22, "Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. So he has understanding now, he has knowledge. And now, lest he reach out his hand, and take also from the tree of life, and eat, and live forever." And it goes on to state, "Therefore the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden," discussing banishment or the expulsion from paradise, or Gan Eden, literally the doorway to life, for Adam and Eve. They then went eastward into what was termed the land of Nod. However, looking at this, it really details what Harari is discussing within his works. And he states within Homo Deus that we have to wage total war on death. That death, because the right to life is sacred, and it is also enshrined within the UN Charter of Human Rights, that it is a human right, life that is, according to him, then we must have total war against death. And then he goes on to state we have to, in essence, use biodigital means to achieve immortality. That is the goal. That the rich really will prolong their life, become immortals, become gods, become the Homo Deus, the God-men. So it's entirely what is stated within Genesis 3:22. Remember as well, by the way, 3:22, as I've stated in previous videos and discussions, and I detail within my book extensively, 3:22 is that number that is very sacred to this Cabal. It derives from primarily Sumer and Babylon. 3:22 or March the 22nd. Again, that is in essence when we had our first season of sacrifice, our first crisis narrative of the new decade. That occurred 11 days prior to what would be the Babylonian or Sumerian Aki-2 for the new year. Festivities centered around Marduk, who is synonymous with Baal, I mean even Yahweh, or one could say not the Hebraic Yahweh, but more so the Yahweh of the Shasu, which was where potentially the Hebrews got the term Yahweh from. However, it's also linked to Moloch, Baal Marduk, as I've mentioned previously, was the actual full title of Marduk. That was then shortened or abbreviated as it went westward into Semitic and Western Semitic lands, and from that it was abbreviated down to Baal or Bel. Same thing occurred with Enlil. Enlil was shortened to El, and El eventually took on the characteristics of both Enlil and Anu. So he became the Lord of Wind or Air, and the Lord of Heaven or the Sky. Furthermore as well, by the way, so Enlil is always synonymous and illustrated as an eagle. Again, we see within the Promethean story that the eagle, which is Zeus or Enlil, ate the liver of Prometheus, which it would regenerate over and over and over again. Now, Prometheus is Enki, or the Lord of the Earth, Lord of Wisdom too, and mischief. The eagle is Zeus and Enlil. We also find all the way throughout the Mediterranean and European nations that, and even their folk religions, that the Sky Father deity was always shown or depicted as an eagle. That was his sort of animal spirit, if you will. Now again, we see this with Rome. To this day, the SPQR, Senatus Populus, Q Romanus, it's always shown, the city is always shown is Jupiter's eagle. Latium as well is always depicted as a eagle, the sigil of the region, that is. We see it obviously in the American context as well. Eagle was chosen as the animal to be upon the Grand Seal of the United States, the Great Seal rather. Throughout every major empire, we see the eagle as a predominant sigil, should we say. You have the House of Hohenzollern, the Royal of Prussia, and Brandenburg as well, actually. They would later go on to be the heads of the German Empire. They have a single-headed black eagle. Russia and even the Habsburgs claimed the double-headed eagle after the fall of Constantinople. The Eastern Roman Empire as well was featured with a double-headed eagle, which actually originated from the Hittite civilization. Hattusa, if you look at the capital city there, it was absolutely everywhere. There's this double-headed eagle everywhere. Now, again, you would see that sort of double-faced or double-headed motif within the character of Janus. I won't get into that within this discussion. I touch upon that within my book, and also I touch upon that within some of the other videos that I've done previously. However, Janus ties quite conclusively into what, the papal keys and their symbology surrounding the keys. So again, that's a sort of tie-in between the key symbology, Janus, and the double-headed eagle symbology. So I think it's talking about the same thing, metaphorically speaking. However, the eagle alone, this is what we're talking about right now, it was never really seen within the British Empire, funnily enough. Never really seen at all. Digressing. We also see it within Kabbalah, would be the Keter. This wellspring of pure potential consciousness, that which sentience and everything else came from. God was that which put that total potential, that expanse of everything that ever will be or could be or what have you, into ordered form. And what that is actually stating is, firstly, it's a macrocosmic truth. But if you look at it in the microcosm, it's exactly what we do. When somebody's creating something, unless you're technically gifted and technically minded, a creative being will have that, as you're saying, that spark of pure potential. Anything is possible. And then you will own that fuzzy vision of pure inspiration, focus it into, an actual creative product.
Well, there's a kind of you're getting into a thing there where you're in flow. You're in the actual flow. I think or in that create. Sometimes I was watching a snooker player, Ronnie O'Sullivan. The way he was walking around the table, and I don't know much about snooker. What do they call it? A 187 or whatever it's called, where you literally knock every ball in from the break. Like, I don't know anything about the game myself personally, but I was watching the dude moving around the table, and he was at one. It was like he just kind of knew it, even by looking at the dude, the way he was moving. He was just totally in that flow of that creative moment. Okay, albeit in his own thing, snooker or whatever, but it's any creative, not even, any expression of will in that sense. So I think that's what they're I think they're hooked into it in their own way, and it's
Very synchronistic. So sorry for interjecting. Very synchronistic you bring that up. I was just watching a documentary on Sumer, and funnily enough, they discuss this again, the Apsu or the Apsu, and they discuss this idea of when people entered that, they felt like they were levitating. Again, it's the flow state. So they were even discussing it back then, this same idea, and then they were using what we experience in our human condition. They were using that to understand macrocosm. But you're absolutely correct. I've seen that with other people as well. Artists and what have you. And they're doing things that seem miraculous, amazing. It's because they're in that flow state. They're tapping into the primordial energy of the cosmos of sentience. It's beautiful, yeah.
it is surely like, but it kind of begs the question, like, if they had the capacity to do that, why do they seem to be kind of heading towards such heinous deeds rather than? But then the beauty is subjective, right? I mean, what's beautiful to you might be tyrannical to me, and maybe they're looking at humanity as overpopulated, overbearing, hateful, warmongering, greedy, etc., etc. God knows they have enough of, in one sense, they have enough of evidence to that of that kind, you know. So, like, if you were to walk up to them as humanity, well, here's my CV, and they look at the CV and they go, you know what? Look, I don't take this the wrong way, but I'm not giving you a job. It's not like it's just come back to me. You know what I mean? Come back to me when you've had a chance to think, well, what you've been up to, because but but as you said earlier on, maybe it is Mother Nature working through the whole thing. You know.
It's absolutely synchronistic again that you mentioned that. I'm just editing a video there where I discuss that same thing. So in my notes on Neom, I look at basically everything they're pushing. So for example, the eating of insects. Pretty much in every, especially in Abrahamism, but it exists in many other religions. That's considered against the law of the divine. For example, in the Old Testament, Leviticus, it discusses, if you eat insects that walk on all fours, this is the language that's used within this, and have outer shells and wings, then you're considered unclean, and it's an abomination within the eyes of the Lord, according to Old Testament law. Now, this goes towards the concept of the clipot hats meot, or the husks of the unclean ones. Even what Gershom Scholem discussed and everything, Harari discusses a similar thing. That obviously, we need to abolish Homo sapiens. They're an obsolete algorithm. Coming back to what we were discussing with that flow state, it's the true potential of everything. It's neither male nor female. It's neither yin or yang, light or dark. It's just everything. He discusses a very, again, it's like the mystery religions in what they sort of strive to do. They strive to become like God, which is, again, this unifying of everything. It's seen within, obviously, what they're pushing now with androgyny and everything. But he discusses in Homo Deus that we have to get rid, discard of this archaic and old-fashioned concept of morality. So he outrightly states that within the book. I would read that book if you want to sort of peer into the mind.
I'm in the process. I'm in the process of reading it at the moment. I just started reading it.
Oh, he's absolutely mad. He says some extremely interesting things.
I think the dude is a front man, Silas. Am
I think so.
Being very cynical in saying that, or
I think even the World Economic Forum are front men. I honestly am coming to.
I mean, look at this. There's anyone who's interested. There's an quickish interview with him on 60 Minutes with Tucker Vanderbilt or Tucker Carlson, where he gives a quick. You get to see who is Mr. Noah Harari. For anyone who doesn't know, listening, he's a modern commentator on the world we're in, and talks a lot about data and how it's going to reorganize human society. And he's a guy who, from what I can see, he's a guy that just bolted out of the blue. He's a bit like Greta or Klaus. He's one of these modern characters that's hitting us with this big message, a one-man advertising hoarding, who's carrying a message, and he's leading, in my view, potentially, he's leading a narrative, he's leading the debate, he is the dialectic, the dialectic in human form around the potential long-term moral implications of data and dataism. It's potentially, in the past we had war, pestilence, famine, the four horsemen. It's potentially, there could be a fifth horseman now, and on that horseman will be data, and how data will affect society. And of course, that trajectory of all that narrative has to be controlled. So lo and behold, out of nowhere, and he says it in the 60 Minutes interview. Well, you know what? How did you suddenly get to be to have sold 65 zillion books in 36,000 different countries, translated into so many different languages? How did you get to be so instantly successful, seemingly? And the cynical person like myself would be asking that kind of question, and the cynical person like myself would be thinking, well, maybe Mr. Harari had contacts within the publishing industry / propaganda industry who en masse decided to push this stuff out with a view to controlling the debate in, those people who are of a kind of quasi-intellectual mindset who think in such a way. So it's possibly. In the interview, it says, how did you get started with your books? Well, he was a history professor. He's from Tel Aviv, I believe. And his partner, who is male, Mr. Harari obviously is male, and his partner is also male. His partner was reading through Mr. Harari's lecture notes, I believe an essay for one of his modules he was teaching, or something he was doing on his PhD or whatever. God knows, he's in Oxford, I believe Oxford educated gentleman. And his male partner was reading through his notes, and he said, do you know what, Noah? That'd be a bestseller if you published it. And he did publish it, and lo and behold, he is now one of the quote leading intellectuals in our world at present. So if you're cynical like myself, you'll probably think that he's been pushed by the powers that be to control this narrative, to lead it. He's perception. What's the word they use, Silas? Perception. Exactly. He's perception management. Par excellence, because he's donned the mantle of the intellectual academic. And now, from what I've read so far, and I only just started last night, it's what they used to call, when I was in college, a polemic. I don't see any footnotes, and I see pictures, and it's very bullet pointy syntax. And no, I'm interested to see what he's going to say, but
A lot of the weirder material within the book begins to seep in around about page 300 or so onwards. For example, page 411, just what we were discussing there. We're akin to the inhabitants of a small isolated island who have just invented the first boat and are about to set sail without a map or even a destination. That's concerning him and the ruling class in this intrepid age of information and the Internet of Things. He states as well, simultaneously, scientists have studied the mental states of people considered to be healthy and normative. However, most relevant researches have been conducted on people from Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic societies. He has the acronym of WEIRD societies, who do not constitute a representative sample of humanity. The study of the human mind has so far assumed that Homo sapiens is Homer Simpson. So, I mean, he's a total, the guy's misanthropic, but in a sort of comical sense.
Well, look, there's a serious note to it, because Mr. Harari is Israeli, and I have Israeli friends, and it's no slight or anything, but like he does mention in the book that the possibility for the technology eventually will be in place to divide humanity. And he said people, he's talking about the human brain being married with technology. And he said it may only be available to the wealthy. And it struck me that as a Jewish man and an Israeli man, given as if you look back on the trajectory of the history of the Jewish people and the ignominy they were subjected to over the course of more than 1,000 years, mistreated, pogroms, pilloried, harassed, harangued, etc., on the grounds of ostensibly race or religion. Now we're talking about the advent of a technology which may create a super race, has the capacity to create a super race that would be, advance people into a complete state of hegemony, potentially. So, like, it becomes possible to be, to be the ultimate racist statement, in a sense, trans racist or hyper racist or super racist, to become, like, you can imagine a society, for example, where our economy, for example, and the functioning of competition in the economy will be dependent on superhumans or augmented humans.
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah. I mean, Harari even discusses it as well, as we were saying, regarding the ideas of consciousness, as we were discussing. It provides a spectrum of consciousness. And yes, this is all designed to basically create a bifurcation of the species between literally the haves and have-nots, not just along economic and financial lines, even social lines, but along biological lines. It's absolutely perfidious. And it really would create, if we, for example, in the Netherlands right now, we're seeing this idea of, or pardon me, this patent come to the fore, where it discusses not just a single artificial womb, which has already been patented in China, I think. We see an array or a battery of artificial wombs, like a mass production of synthetic humans. Obviously, Harari as well discusses gene editing. So yes, it's absolutely leading us to, an absolutely terrible system where, in essence, one will be alive but already dead. Again, a husk. So we have to resist that.